The emergency klaxon screamed through station harmony as Chef Marcus Cheen watched his sous chef vomit into a waste receptacle. 3 diplomatic chefs had already been hospitalized after attempting to prepare meals for Empress Zixthara there. Minds couldn't handle the psychic feedback from her complete indifference to their elaborate creations. The Velthari Empress was arriving in 6 hours, and humanity's admission to the Galactic Council hung in the balance. "She's killed 17 chefs across 7 species," Director Walsh said, her hands shaking as she reviewed the casualty reports on her holographic display. The images were disturbing master chefs from across the galaxy, reduced to catatonic states, their life's passion crushed by an alien mind that viewed their art as meaningless molecular arrangements. Not intentionally, they just break when they realize their life's work means absolutely nothing to her. The Coraxians tried a feast that took 3 months to prepare. She consumed it in 30 seconds and asked why they were wasting her time. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he scrolled through the xenobiology reports. The kitchen around him buzzed with frantic activity as his remaining staff prepared increasingly elaborate dishes, each more desperate than the last. Golden-scaled Zephyrian caviar, worth more than a starship, sat next to crystallized Andromedan honey that took centuries to mature. None of it would matter. "Chef Chun," called Dr. Sarah Kim, the station xenobiologist, as she rushed into the kitchen clutching a data pad. "I've been analyzing the neural scans from the previous encounters. Every chef who attempted to feed the Empress experienced the same psychic trauma: complete ego dissolution when confronted with her absolute indifference to their craft." Marcus paused in his review of the Velthari biological data. Something had been nagging at him since he'd first read the reports. "Show me the deep neural scans again," he said, pulling up a holographic display of the Empress's brain structure. The crystalline neural network was unlike anything in known biology. Geometric patterns of living light that processed information at quantum speeds. "Here," Dr. Kim highlighted sections of the scan. "These are the active pathways: pure logic, mathematical processing, resource allocation. But look at these dormant sections." She pointed to darker areas that seemed almost vestigial. "They're structured like emotional processing centers, but they haven't shown activity in any recorded encounter." Marcus leaned closer, his chef's intuition picking up on something the scientists had missed. "They're not dead," he murmured. "They're sleeping. Look at the neural architecture. It's too complex to be evolutionary dead weight." The Velthari didn't lose the capacity for emotion. They suppressed it. Around them, the kitchen descended into chaos. Master Chef Dubuis, on loan from the Luna Colony's most prestigious restaurant, was having a nervous breakdown as he tried to perfect a molecular gastronomy creation that would supposedly transcend species barriers through pure artistry. His assistants frantically adjusted flavor, compounds and texture matrices while he screamed about the futility of their efforts. 6 hours. Director Walsh's voice crackled over the intercom. "The Empress's ship just dropped out of hyperspace. Whatever we're serving, it needs to be ready." Marcus closed the biological files and walked to his personal storage locker. Inside, wrapped in his grandmother's old kitchen towel, was a small container of tomato seeds, heirloom varieties from Earth, that he'd carried with him to every posting. Next to them sat a block of aged cheddar and a loaf of bread he'd baked that morning from a sourdough starter his family had maintained for generations. "Chef, what are you doing?" Dr. Kim asked, watching him gather these simple ingredients while around them others prepared dishes worth small fortunes. "Something stupid," Marcus replied, but his hands were steady as he began to work. He'd grown up in his grandmother's kitchen in rural Oregon, learning that food wasn't about impressing people, it was about caring for them. When he was 8 and afraid of thunderstorms, she'd made him tomato soup and grilled cheese. When he was 16 and heartbroken, she'd made the same meal. When he left for culinary school, She'd taught him the recipe and told him it wasn't about the ingredients, it was about the intention. "You can't be serious," Master Chef Dubois sputtered, abandoning his molecular creation to stare at Marcus. "You're going to serve the most powerful being in the galaxy soup and a sandwich? This is diplomatic suicide." Marcus ignored him, focusing on the simple ritual of preparation. He heated butter in a pan, the familiar sizzle grounding him as chaos erupted around him. The tomatoes went into a pot with cream, herbs, and a touch of honey. Nothing exotic, nothing that would impress a food critic, but everything that had ever meant comfort to him. "The Empress's shuttle is docking," came the announcement. Through the kitchen's viewports, Marcus could see the Velthari Vesela, structure of impossible geometry that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Just looking at it made his head ache. Director Walsh burst into the kitchen, her diplomatic uniform disheveled. "Chun, what's your status?" "The reception committee is in position, and we need to know what you're serving so we can prepare the presentation speech." "Tomato soup and grilled cheese," Marcus said simply, ladling the soup into 2 simple ceramic bowls. The bread sizzled in the pan, golden and perfect. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of cooking. Every chef, every diplomat, every scientist stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Perhaps he had. The weight of humanity's future pressed down on him. But all he could think about was his grandmother's weathered hands teaching him to flip a sandwich without breaking it. "You're going to get US all killed," whispered one of the junior chefs. Marcus plated the meal with the same care he'd learned as a child, soup in the bowl. Sandwich cut diagonally, a small garnish of fresh basil. It looked humble next to the elaborate creations surrounding it, but it carried something the others didn't: genuine intention. "Sir," Dr. Kim said quietly, "the psychic readings from the Empress are intense. Her indifference field is so strong it's affecting the station's emotional dampeners." "Are you sure about this?" Marcus picked up the tray, feeling the weight of 2 simple bowls and a sandwich that might determine the fate of his species. Through the kitchen doors, he could hear the sound of the Empress's arrival, a harmonic resonance that made the station's hull vibrate. In moments, he would face a being whose very presence had driven master chefs to madness. "No," he said honestly, "but my grandmother always said that when you don't know what else to do, you feed people. So that's what I'm going to do." As he walked toward the banquet hall, Marcus carried with him not just a meal, but the accumulated love of generations, the simple truth that sometimes the most profound acts of diplomacy happen not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moment when one being offers another a bowl of soup made with care. The banquet hall fell silent as the Empress materialized, not walked, not entered, but simply came into existence as if reality had been rewritten around her presence. 12 feet of living crystal and starlight, her form defied human perception. Where her feet should have touched the floor, space itself seemed to bend, creating impossible angles that made the assembled diplomats' eyes water. The elaborate feast prepared by the backup team, dishes worth more than entire planets, sat untouched on golden platters. Suddenly looking pathetic under her alien gaze, Marcus felt the psychic pressure hit him like a physical blow. This was what had broken the other chefs, not just indifference, but a crushing awareness of cosmic insignificance. The Empress's mind was vast, ancient, and utterly without warmth. She surveyed the banquet with optical sensors that burned like miniature stars, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that shattered the crystal wine glasses and made the station's hull groan. "Another waste," she intoned, each word resonating through dimensions humans couldn't perceive. "Your species learns nothing. I have consumed the finest offerings of 17 civilizations, each believing their culinary artistry would somehow bridge the gap between our kinds. All meaningless arrangements of molecules." Director Walsh stepped forward, her diplomatic training warring with the primal urge to flee. "Your Majesty, we have prepared silence." The word carried such finality that Walsh's voice simply stopped working. The Empress's attention swept across the room like a searchlight, and Marcus watched seasoned diplomats crumble under her psychic weight. Ambassador Chun, no relation, despite the name, began weeping uncontrollably. The Andromedan delegate's translator implant sparked and died. Overwhelmed by frequencies it couldn't process. This was the moment. Marcus stepped forward, his simple tray looking absurd in the face of such cosmic power. The Empress's gaze fell on him, and he felt his thoughts being dissected with surgical precision. But instead of elaborate culinary theory or desperate attempts to impress, she found something unexpected: the simple, honest memory of a child being comforted by his grandmother's cooking. "What is this?" The Empress's voice carried a note of confusion, the first emotion anyone had ever detected from her. Her crystalline form shifted, light patterns dancing across her surface as she processed what she'd found in his mind. "You approach me with simplicity?" "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the psychic pressure that felt like standing in a hurricane. "I'd like to share something different. Not a feast designed to impress you, but a memory. A moment when food meant more than sustenance." The other diplomats stared in horror as Marcus set his humble offering on the table before the Empress. 2 ceramic bowls of tomato soup, still steaming. 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, golden and perfect. A small sprig of basil for garnish. Next to the elaborate molecular gastronomy creations and exotic delicacies, it looked like a child's lunch. The Empress leaned down, her massive form casting impossible shadows. When she spoke, her voice had lost some of its harmonic perfection, becoming almost curious. "You offer me the food of younglings? This is your diplomatic strategy?" "This is the food of comfort," Marcus replied. "When I was afraid, when I was sad, when I felt lost, my grandmother made this for me. Not because it was complex or expensive, but because it carried her love." For a moment that stretched into eternity, the Empress simply stared at the simple meal. Then, with movements that seemed to bend space around them, she lifted one of the bowls. Her method of consumption was unlike anything human. The soup seemed to dissolve into her crystalline matrix, becoming part of her very structure. And then something unprecedented happened. The Empress's form began to resonate at frequencies that hadn't been heard from a Velthari in millennia. Deep within her crystalline neural network, dormant pathways that had slept for eons suddenly sparked to life. The simple molecular structure of tomatoes and cream triggered something far more. Complex genetic memories buried so deep that her species had forgotten they existed. What is this sensation?" she whispered, her voice losing its otherworldly harmonics and becoming almost vulnerable. The soup wasn't just being processed as fuel. For the first time in 3,000 years, Empress Zixthara was experiencing taste not as molecular analysis, but as something that carried meaning beyond nutrition. Marcus watched in amazement as the Empress's crystalline surface began to shift. Patterns of light dancing across her form in ways that seemed almost organic. "It's warmth," he said softly. "Not just temperature, but the warmth of being cared for. The soup carries the memory of every time someone made it with love." The Empress consumed the second bowl more slowly, her massive form trembling as dormant neural pathways fired in cascade reactions. Ancient genetic codes were unlocking themselves, revealing memories of a time before the Velthari had chosen pure logic over emotion. She actually remembered, what it felt like to share a meal with others of her kind. To find joy in simple pleasures, to connect through the act of nourishment. "Impossible," she breathed, reaching for the grilled cheese sandwich with movements that seemed almost reverent. As she consumed it, the awakening neural pathways sent shockwaves through her consciousness. The simple combination of bread and cheese became a revelation: comfort food in its purest form. Carrying the accumulated love of generations, the assembled diplomats watched in stunned Silence, as the most powerful being in known space, began to change before their eyes. The cold, geometric perfection of her form was softening, becoming more organic, more alive. Light patterns that had been rigid mathematical sequences now flowed like living things across her crystalline surface. "I remember," the Empress said, her voice now carrying harmonics of wonder instead of cold authority. We used to share sustenance. Before the great logical awakening, before we chose efficiency over connection, we used to find meaning in simple acts of care." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he witnessed something that would reshape galactic history. "Food is one of the first languages of love," he said. "When we share a meal, we share a piece of our soul." The Empress lifted the empty bowl with crystalline fingers that now trembled with something beyond mere physical vibration. As she stared at the simple ceramic vessel that had contained such profound revelation, something impossible began to happen. Liquid light, actual tears, began forming at the edges of her optical sensors. "I had forgotten," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of millennia of suppressed emotion. "We had forgotten what it meant to feel." The first tear fell like a shooting star, striking the empty bowl with a sound like crystal bells. Then another, and another. The Empress Zixthara, ruler of 1,000 worlds, master of technologies beyond human comprehension, wept for the first time in recorded Velthari history, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming joy of remembering what it meant to be truly alive. The Empress's tears fell like liquid starlight, each drop creating ripples of psychic energy that radiated outward from station harmony at faster-than-light speeds. Across the galaxy, Velthari's ships suddenly went silent as their crews experienced something their species hadn't felt in over 10,000 years, the overwhelming rush of suppressed emotions flooding back into their consciousness. On the flagship Eternal Logic, Admiral Kethver collapsed as memories of sharing crystalline nectar with his bondmate before the great purification crashed through his mental barriers. On distant mining colonies, Velthari workers stopped their efficient extraction protocols and stared at the simple nutrient dispensers, suddenly remembering when food had been more than fuel. "What have you done?" Director Walsh whispered, her voice barely audible over the harmonic resonance emanating from the Empress. The station's hull vibrated with frequencies that seemed to reach into the very fabric of space-time. Emergency alerts flashed across every screen as Velthari vessels throughout the sector began broadcasting on channels that had been silent for millennia, not the cold, efficient communications of a logical empire, but something that sounded almost like singing. The Empress rose to her full height, her crystalline form now pulsing with patterns of light that seemed alive, organic, beautiful in ways that defied the geometric perfection she had embodied for centuries. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the assembled diplomats weep, not from psychic pressure, but from the sheer beauty of emotion finally given voice. "You have given us back our souls," she said, reaching out with fingers that sparkled like captured starlight to touch Marcus's face. The contact sent visions flooding through his mind, the true history of the Velthari, hidden for eons beneath layers of enforced logic. He saw their ancient civilization as it truly was, beings of crystalline light who had once danced among the stars, who had shared meals of crystallized energy that carried not just sustenance, but joy, love, connection. He witnessed the great tragedy, a cosmic disaster that had claimed billions of their kind, leaving the survivors so devastated by grief that they chose to seal away their capacity for emotion rather than face such pain again. "We called it the logical awakening," the Empress continued, her tears now flowing freely, each drop containing the compressed sorrow of millennia. But it was not awakening, it was the deepest sleep imaginable. We chose efficiency over empathy, logic over love, survival over truly living. And in doing so, We became the very thing we sought to protect ourselves from: empty, hollow, dead inside. Marcus felt the weight of galactic history shifting around him. Through the station's viewports, he could see Velthari's ships beginning to change their formations. The rigid geometric patterns that had defined their fleet movements for eons were dissolving into something more organic, more alive. Ships that had maintained perfect distances were drawing closer together, as if seeking the comfort of proximity after millennia of isolation. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Chun managed to say, his voice shaking with the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "What does this mean for the Galactic Council? For the treaties, the trade agreements? The Council is dead," the Empress declared. But there was no anger in her voice, only a profound sadness for time wasted. "How can we govern a galaxy when we have forgotten how to truly live? How can we make decisions about the welfare of countless species when we have cut ourselves off from the very emotions that make life worth living?" She turned to address the assembled diplomats, her presence no longer crushing but somehow uplifting, inspiring. "I dissolve the Galactic Council, not in conquest but in recognition of its fundamental flaw. We have tried to govern through cold logic, to solve the problems of living beings while denying our own capacity to feel. It has led only to stagnation, to the slow death of wonder and connection across the stars." The implications hit the diplomatic corps like a shockwave. The Galactic Council had maintained peace for over 1,000 years through careful balance and logical negotiation. Its dissolution would reshape the political landscape of known space. But as Marcus watched the Empress, he realized this wasn't destruction, it was rebirth. "In its place," the Empress continued, her voice now carrying harmonics of hope that made the very air seem to shimmer, "I establish the circle of shared meals. Diplomacy will no longer happen in sterile conference rooms where beings sit in isolation, protected by barriers of protocol and procedure. Instead, we will meet as we were meant to, sharing sustenance, sharing stories, sharing the fundamental act of care that connects all living things." Dr. Kim stepped forward, her scientific mind struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. "Your Majesty, the psychic resonance from your emotional awakening, it's reaching Velthari populations across the galaxy. We're receiving reports of massive social upheaval as your people rediscover their capacity for feeling." The Empress nodded, her crystalline features somehow managing to convey both sorrow and joy. "There will be chaos," she admitted. 10,000 years of suppressed emotion cannot be released without consequence. Some of my people will struggle to adapt. Others may choose to return to the old ways rather than face the pain that comes with feeling. But for the first time since the great tragedy, we have a choice, and choice itself is a form of freedom we had forgotten existed." She turned back to Marcus, who stood transfixed by the magnitude of what his simple act had unleashed. "You, Marcus Chun of Earth, will be the first to hold the title of Memory Keeper, a position that did not exist until this moment. Because we had forgotten that memories could be preserved in more than databanks and historical records. You will teach others what you have taught me, that the simplest acts of care can carry the deepest truths." Around them, the station's communication systems erupted with incoming messages. Species across the galaxy were reporting similar awakenings among their own populations, ancient traditions of communal dining being rediscovered, forgotten recipes being shared, the simple act of preparing food with love being recognized as a form of diplomacy more powerful than any treaty. The Caraxians, who had tried to impress the Empress with their elaborate feast, sent word that their master chefs were abandoning molecular gastronomy to learn the comfort foods of their ancestors. The Andromedan Collective, known for their efficient nutrient distribution systems, began establishing communal kitchens where citizens could gather to share meals and stories. Even the warlike Thrakari reported that their warriors were laying down arms to learn the art of bread making from captured human prisoners. "This is just the beginning," the Empress said. her tears now slowing but her voice filled with wonder at the possibilities ahead. We have spent so long trying to eliminate the variables that make life unpredictable: emotion, connection, the messy, beautiful chaos of truly living. But you have shown us that these are not bugs in the system of existence. They are features. They are what make life worth living. As news of the revolution spread across the galaxy, Marcus realized that his grandmother's simple recipe had become something far greater than comfort food. It had become the catalyst for a galactic renaissance of empathy, proving that sometimes the most profound changes begin not with grand gestures or elaborate plans, but with the simple act of one being caring enough to share a bowl of soup with another. The age of pure logic was ending. The age of shared meals and shared hearts had begun.